So we'll get started. Just one of the things we like to say always in the beginning for the health information privacy is that this is a public forum. So if you are listening and you're asked a question, whether we may make the voice live, we may read on the chat. If you would like to remain anonymous, just keep as much private information as you like. Ask the questions in a general sense. If you type it, we'll try to just avoid using a name. If you would like, in the middle of the conversation, we'll do this conversationally. If you haven't used a Zoom meeting before, if you run your cursor over the bottom of the screen, you will get things. You'll see Q&A or chat, and you can type questions in there, and we will read them to Kathleen, who's presenting it. So with that being said, it's all yours.
All right. Emily, are you starting?
I'm sorry, you broke up in the middle there.
Oh, are you starting or am I?
You go ahead.
Okay. All right. So tonight we're talking about a very popular behavior topic when we're talking about individuals with autism, and that's behavior. And as you do lots of reading around behavior, there's lots of different philosophies and styles of approaching behavior. These are some of my top go-tos when I'm supporting students with autism in the school setting. And I found that these really help to frame my mindset when working with students, and they also help to support individuals with autism and a variety of other neurodifferences to be successful in whatever environment we're looking at. So I pulled from a bunch of research, and we'll talk about that as we go through it tonight. So Nicholas, if you could turn to the next slide, please. So questions are going in Q&A and chat, and I'll answer those as we go along. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I am currently a program support teacher with the Wauwatosa School District here in the Milwaukee area. And what that means is I do diagnostics for students who are qualifying for special education services. But the part of my job that I enjoy the most is going out and doing program support. So what this means is that when a teacher or a student is having some kind of challenge with learning, whether that's academic, social, or behavioral, I go out and I work with the team, and we try to problem solve together to come up with workable solutions for the school and for the child that is experiencing the difficulty. And I would say that 95% of my calls are related to behavior in some sort of way. Prior to that, I worked for 12 years as a special education teacher in elementary in Wauwatosa. And then as I was doing that, I also spent 12 summers with Camp Awesome, including working with coordinating their programming for their youth camp. So I got a lot of my experience from the on-the-ground training with Camp Awesome, as well as being in the classroom. Certainly attending lots of trainings and reading lots of books written by people who are far smarter than me. So let's turn the page. So we're going to start with tip number 1. So my first tip when working with families and working with students and children is that our kids will mirror our behaviors. So in times of distress, people, as part of their nature, will look to the leader in the situation for how to react. The energy that we as that leader projects is often the response that we'll get. So in this time of this COVID closure, when parents have become the leader all day, every day, 24/7, our children are looking to us to see how to respond to this very unknown time. So if we are presenting ourselves in a very calm and collected manner, that energy is portrayed onto our children, and we often get that same kind of energy back and can bring them down when they're in an elevated state. So one of my strategies is always calming myself before I approach the behaviors. That may mean taking a step back, whether that's 2 seconds or a minute, and taking a deep breath and trying to center myself and present myself calmly outside, whether or not that's how I'm feeling on the inside. One phrase that I often say to myself when approached with challenging situations is slower, lower, and less. When we slow down our rate of speech, we lower our volume and we use less language. That is often an effective strategy in de-escalating situations and bringing the energy in the room down. Nicholas, if you could turn to the next slide, please. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the incredible 5-point scale. So a 5 is what we would say is totally out of control, and we can define this differently for different individuals. And a 1 is when we're in that completely calm or relaxed state, and then we've got gradients of that in between. So when we're talking about children who are, or adults who are in an elevated state, they're at that 4 or that 5. As the adult or as the person who's doing the regulating in that situation, we need to try to keep our response at a 1 or a 2, at least on the outside. On the inside, we may be feeling like we're at a 4 or a 5, but we really need to try to portray that 1 or that 2 to help that individual calm and regain focus. So one of the people that I think about when we think about responding with that 1 or the 2 is Captain Sully Sullenberg. And as you remember, a number of years ago, he landed the plane on the Hudson and got everyone safely off board. So I often think about us needing to be like Sully as we're captaining that behavioral episode and maintaining that calm and composure to make sure that all of our passengers make it to safer shores. That's that point. I guess I don't have anything else to say there. You could turn the page, Nicholas. So number 2, this is a phrase that I've stolen from Ross Greene. So problem solving is proactive and not reactive. So many times, most of the time, we know our kids well, and as a parent, we can predict with relative certainty when our child is going to have difficulty in a situation. They've had difficulty with that exact same situation before, or they've had difficulty with a situation that's very similar to that. We know that the demands of that situation are more than our child can handle in that situation. So Dr. Ross Greene tells us that once we understand what makes a situation challenging, we can predict that it's going to be challenging and put supports in place to prevent it or lessen that problem in the future. So if you are thinking back on this past, this has been 5 or 6 weeks when we've been at home together, you probably know that maybe math instruction is going to be what's going to be your sticking point for the day, and you're going to have some challenging behaviors around math instruction every day. So if we know that, then we can proactively plan. What can we do before math instruction happens to help us get into a more regulated state? How can we support during math instruction to make sure that that anxiety does not become too great? And then what can we do after math instruction to reward and reinforce those positive behaviors? Turn the page. All right, another line that we steal from Dr. Ross Greene is that kids do well if they can. And for most cases, kids are generally not choosing to be bad. Certainly there's times when children may try to manipulate situations and know exactly what they're doing, but in most cases, maladaptive behaviors happen when the demands of the situation exceed the skills that we have to handle the problem. And this works for kids as well as it works for adults. So all of us, if we're going to be completely honest, have lost control of our behavior at some point, probably within this whole COVID shutdown. So we don't generally start the day by thinking, oh, I'm going to yell at my kids today, or I'm going to yell at my coworker, or get mad at my spouse, or lose control of the situation. And it just kind of happens because whatever's happening is more than we can handle. And as we're thinking particularly about this healthcare closure, we have to remember that these are stressful times for everyone. And this is different than any of us had anticipated our school year unfolding. Most of us hadn't planned to be homeschool instructors. So it's going to take time and it's going to take practice for us to make this homeschool experience more successful, and make sure that we have provided our kids with all the tools that they need to do well in these situations. So this is really more of a mindset for us as an adult rather than a strategy for us to use with kids, but just going into each situation thinking, do they have the skills to handle this? And if not, how can I help to make the anxiety less significant for them? My fourth tool, with those understandings in mind, this is where we go first when I think of behavior modification, is thinking about how can I make it visual. Visuals, I think, can be kind of scary for a lot of people because they think that they need to be really complex and thought out about ahead of time. And while it's fantastic to be proactive, visuals can also very effectively be done in the moment as the situation is unfolding. So I've given you some examples here on the screen, and I'll explain what those visuals mean to you because I presented them in a very visual strategy. So the first one on the left side is a variation of that green-red task that many of your children probably used in early elementary year, or maybe even ABA therapy. Of green is what I still need to do, and red is what has already been done. So this one, the tabs flip up to show that the activity has been completed. So that is obviously one that's done using the tool of Board Maker. It is something that is very routine and done day after day. And when you have routine events like that, it's very helpful to have those pre-made visuals just to pull out. The next there is a first then chart. This could be done on an index card or a Post-it, back of a piece of mail. Just draw a T-chart on the page that says first then. On the left, you have first read books, and then on the right, pretzels are rewards. So knowing that when we have that, that predictability of what happens first and what happens next, it often helps us to get through a task. On the right side, I have a checklist on a Post-it. And a Post-it is one of the tools that I carry around all the time in my back pocket. And I can whip that out and make a quick visual on the fly with a pencil. And my students will tell me that I'm a horrible artist, and it doesn't really matter as long as I can make a picture that gets the message across. The other thing that you can do is make a list with written words. So whether or not the child is a reader, written lists are very helpful for two reasons. One, it creates predictability, and that checking off shows passage through time. But the other is the magic in it isn't necessarily that they can read it independently, but everyone who's looking at that list is using the exact same language and the exact same script to help that individual process the situation. So as they ask people what it says, they're using the exact same language, and they don't need to come up with a different script in their mind to how to handle that behavior. And then the last picture there I have is for an iPhone. I know many, I'm not sure the age of your children on the call tonight, but many students beginning in even second and third grade have an iPhone or some other kind of electronic device at the ready all the time. Products in particular have a lot of built-in features, but there's lots of Android equivalents as well. So things like the reminder app can be set up to provide a visual reminder at a certain time or at a certain location. There's a built-in timer on the phone that you can use to show how much time a child has left to work on an academic assignment, or how much time until it's ready for, until dinner will be ready. You can set that for just about anything. There's also the Time Timer app, which can be downloaded for just a few dollars. That is hugely helpful, as that shows a visual progression of time and helps children develop the sense of elapsed time. Emails can be used to share either social stories or social narratives. Google Drive can also be used as a strategy for sharing social stories or social narratives. Another piece of the magic of visuals is that visuals tell us rather than ask. And if I would add a sixth behavior tip to this presentation, it would be stop asking questions and start giving directives. So when we say things like, do you want to go outside and take a bike ride? If our child tells us no, they're giving us their honest answer. When what we really meant to say was, it's time to go outside and take a bike ride. And that telling rather than asking is one of the easiest strategies to explain and one of the hardest to implement. I still catch myself slipping and offering choices rather than giving statements as to what's going to happen on a regular basis. So our language is something also that we want to be mindful of. We certainly can build controlled choice into visuals by giving a child 2 or 3 choices to choose from. But when we make those open-ended, do you want to do X, then we give them the permission to not engage in that behavior and to engage in a different behavior. So just something to think of as we're creating visuals, but also as we're talking to our children about, are we giving a choice or are we telling them that this is what they need to do? The last thing I listed down there is a URL, and if you could pop, Nicholas, if you could pop that URL up into the chat box at some point, please. Katie Berg is working with CISA 1, and CISA is a division of the Department of Public Instruction. And she is working on neurodiversity. And she has a fabulous collection of visual examples that's quite a few pages long that show different ways that visuals can be created for individuals, children and adults, for a variety of settings. And in addition to this visual list that I've provided here, she has a number of wonderful webinars and samples of behavioral support strategies on her website that are very accessible and easy to understand. I'd highly recommend checking her out. She's located right here in Pewaukee. You could turn the page, please. And then the last thing to keep in mind, my 5th point, is that we need to be mindful of when we're trying to teach new strategies and implement new behavioral philosophies or approaches to handling our children's behavior. So as we look at that left picture, we're looking at a heightened storm, the heightened state of being in a storm. And when we're in that heightened state of being in the middle of that storm or that raging behavioral moment, our job is not to teach. Our job is to keep everyone safe. And then once the storm has passed and the skies are blue again, that is the time that we want to jump in and teach. So if we go back to that 5-point scale that I talked about before, that behavioral incident would be that 4 or that 5 on the left. And then on the right, we're looking at that 1 or 2 situation. Our brain is not physically able to access new learning when we're in a heightened state. The cortisol levels are too high. So we need to wait until we get back to that baseline to be able to process that situation and to be accessible for new learning for the future. So what's important to remember, another important point along with that, is that some individuals can make that recovery really quick and might be ready to talk about that situation within 10 or 15 minutes of it passing. While other individuals may hang on to that for a long time. And even though it may appear on the outside that they're back at a 1 or 2, if we ask them about how they're functioning, they might still feel like they're in that 3 or 4 state and they're not ready to process it. So it's really important that if our child has the ability to talk to us about that and to use a regulation tool and tell us that we respect that. And if they don't have that ability, that we really tune into those behaviors and those very subtle observations as their care provider, and make sure that they're back into a more regulated state before we try to teach new strategies and implement new learning.
I think that's one of the most important things. We were just having a discussion about it here in our house because, as you can imagine, heightened states are more frequent during COVID-19 at every house. Uh, so I think it's very important to realize that in those heightened states, like you said, you can't learn. It's just neurology. When cortisol floods your brain, you can't learn. My wife had said something really good. She said, try to imagine in that Jurassic Park scene when the T-Rex is chasing the Jeep, if someone put an algebra book in front of you, like
Mhm.
you couldn't learn. It is not a teachable moment. So yeah, de-stressing however your child does it, humor or whatever, I think is a great technique. One of the panelists asked, what do you do if your child's 18, cannot control hitting out of the blue when she's frustrated, she loses control of herself? We've tried everything.
Okay. There's lots of different things that could be tried. I'd want to know more specifically about the context. So, there's a variety of things I would look at. One would be his or her ability to communicate. What strategies is she able to use when she's in a regulated state? And what language might she need to be using in place of that hitting? So not knowing what her verbal skills are would impact how we would do that. So for a child or a young adult who has very limited verbal skills, we would want to make sure that she has access to some kind of augmentative alternative communication that would give us some basic information about what she needs. So some kind of choice board or core board, depending on what she's learned through working with a speech language pathologist. I'd also look at what's happening before that and what's happening in the environment. So if there are specific things that we know that trigger those behaviors, we want to try to back it up and try to front load from there. I'm just reading as I'm talking here. She does not understand the impact of hitting in a normal day. She talks and explains to a limit.
Would you like, by any chance, would you like us to have would the parent want to ask in voice, or would that be too identifying? We might be able to turn on her mic. If you just tell us if that would be okay. Okay, Nicholas, could you undo her mic? Nicholas, just let her know that she can speak.
Yep, she is unmuted now.
Okay.
You hear me?
Yes.
Now I hear you.
Oh, this is amazing. So yes. So she is 18 and she has she can behave like any other child, 8 years old, 9 years old, 10. She definitely has a cognitive disability, but in a regular day, you could never tell she has a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But then those instances that she loses control, so she hit somebody at the Mequon district school, and they had the police involved and the Mequon police and the judge, and they were threatening her to be taken to jail, even though she has an IEP and it's already passed. But I'm trying to figure it out. If you guys have any advice, I've done everything and she comes down, but it's when she hits. I have been told that people can call the police and she can be arrested. I am her guardian.
Okay.
I'm always nervous. She was at the Goodwill training and she hit the coach. Just not too much, but the fact that she touches another human, she cannot have a normal life.
Right.
And Kathleen, before you answer, one of the things, with our company, and we don't have her on, she's been on before, we have a BCBAD behavioral analyst who specializes in maladaptive, self-injurious, and dangerous behaviors. Like, one of the things she has said, though, is that because we wanted her to get on and talk about it, that she said it breaks her heart, but it's virtually impossible to give any kind of generic advice.
Right.
That she normally has to work with the clients. And believe me, she does so much pro bono work, it kills her. She was going to do it with the head of the BCBA professional national association, and he agreed. It's just impossible to give any specific advice. And Kathleen, you can speak, but I think I would suggest that you go to a behavioral therapist, someone who specializes exactly in these teen maladaptive behaviors. It is a specialty.
What do
And I
you
think
call behavioral therapist?
Board certified behavioral analyst.
Board certified behavioral analyst. Okay.
I know there's one that works with CISA. A number of the autism organizations hire them on locally. I would also recommend, when school's back in session, talking to the special education case manager and seeing if there is someone in a program support role who can come in and do some objective observation. A lot of times, when I was in my classroom, I had thought that I'd thought it all through, and I was so emotionally connected to it that I wasn't able to stand back and take that bird's eye view and consider some of those outside factors that I was so like ingrained in. It was just part of our routine. Like, I didn't even notice that those things were happening. And when a consultant came in from the outside and looked at the situation, it became much more objective to me.
Oh, great. Thank you.
And can I ask you how much, because Kathleen had asked it in the beginning, how much language does she have?
Oh, she speaks like you and me.
Okay, all right. Because I was going to say, if she had limited language, adding to
No.
the language could improve things.
And that also, it's a really bad thing because she looks, and she's extremely pretty, so she can get away with, but definitely she has a problem. But I thank you, because I never heard about the, what is it, the
It's
BCBA.
BCBA. And if I were to look for one, because they range in talent, I would look for one. I look for one in Wisconsin, especially one that has a doctorate or training in psychology, and someone who specifically works with maladaptive behaviors with teens. It's a
adaptive behavior. Okay.
yeah. These are the type of things.
Something
It's
that I could find through the Autistic Society.
Yes,
Emily, yeah.
we have a resource directory,
Oh,
and there are companies that do it. If she is in school,
oh no, she just graduated.
they grad.
Mhm.
Oh, she graduated. Okay.
Is she receiving 18 to 21 transition services?
Well, she was on DVR, but like I said, she got to the Goodwill here in, we live in Mequon, and
Okay.
she hit the coach. I mean, not too hard, just like a slap, but in paper, you cannot touch another human being. So she was let go.
So what I would recommend is that you would get, depending on what kind of funding she has, does she have IRIS or family care
She does.
funding?
She has Iris.
Okay, then we do have resources in our resource directory for BCBAs, and the resource directory is online on our website.
When you say on our website, you mean like the Autistic Society?
Yep, it's
Oh.
www.assew.org,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a navigation bar near the top of the page, and
Okay.
that will say resources.
Okay.
And if you click on that, you can see a place where you can get to our resource directory.
Could you just repeat, please, one last time? www.
ASSEW. It's our acronym for Autism Society Southeastern Wisconsin, and then .org.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
And there are not all of the BCBAs work with adults, but
Okay.
there are some, like I know Wisconsin ABA does, and there are other ones that will come in and just look at a specific situation that the individual is struggling with and
Okay.
try to formulate a plan to address whatever, to make sure that they can be safe.
Great. Thank you.
Another really good resource, and I've referenced him a few times, is Dr. Ross Green. And on my closing slide, I have a link to his website. So he has a number of books out. One of them is called The Explosive Child, which is kind of a misleading title. I wish they would have titled the book something else. But his process of collaborative problem solving works really well if she has very strong verbal skills. Be something to check out. And on his website, he has, I forget what they call it, but it's like a walkthrough of how to do his process, and there's video models of parents doing it with their children and teachers doing it with children, and a lot of
Please
districts
repeat
are
the
turning
acronym.
to that.
I have just placed its livesinthebalance.org,
Fabulous.
and I have just placed it in the chat, and then I have
Thanks,
just
Brian.
placed the association, the Autism Society's Southeast Wisconsin's address there as well.
Fabulous. Okay. Beautiful.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
So if we have other people too, I think it's fantastic that we have a resource like this. Kathleen's amazing here. If there are other parents who have questions, perhaps you could, if you want to put them in the chat or the Q&A.
While we're waiting, Brian, if you want to turn to the next page, I'll just reference some of my resources here for further learning. You know, you can go kind of down the rabbit hole and go lots of different places with behavior, but some of the ones that I go to on a pretty consistent basis are CISA's neurodiversity resources. I referenced Katie Berg earlier. She's the project coordinator for CISA, and she reaches out to the rest of the state. She has some fantastic resources there and some good examples if you're looking for how to implement certain visuals, or you have an idea for a visual but you're not quite sure how to approach it. She's also wonderful about emailing people back about questions. And then the next one there is Lives in the Balance, which is Dr. Ross Green is the psychologist behind it. And a lot of school districts in the state and across the country are moving to this model for behavioral intervention, and are getting some really good results with it. So as I was saying before, there's a walkthrough process for both parents and educators as to how to implement this strategy. And the books that he's written are fairly easy to read, but I think if you do the walkthrough, you could probably save yourself the time of reading the book. And if you feel like you need to have polished visuals, or if that's what your child is used to in the school setting or in a therapy setting, Boardmaker is offering a free 30-day trial during the COVID shutdown for any parent that is interested. So if you go to Boardmaker and sign up, then they also have quite the library that has been submitted by other users of visuals that you could copy over to your account and either modify or use as is. And you can make those low tech where you just print them off and use the static visual, or if you're very tech savvy or you can steal somebody else's work, you can make those interactive as well, and they can be used on an iPad. So if that's something that you're interested in, it's an awesome resource. It's an incredibly expensive resource that's available for a limited time that would probably get till about the end of the school year.
I have put all of those links. So Lives in the Balance is there. The Autism Society's link is there. The CESA Neurodiversity Resources is there, as well as the Boardmaker link. And Kathleen, I think, is the fourth person in this series of webinars who has referred to this Boardmaker online. So I think you can take the unanimous decision of all the professionals that this is a great, great resource that's free.
Yes, it's the Microsoft Word of special ed teachers.
So that's what Gina said. That's what Jane said. I think Maria even brought that up. So everybody has been pointing to this. And then for those of you who are Gemini clients, we have social stories and social narratives online videos that will discuss a lot of different a lot of different problem behaviors and how to create them, what the replacement behaviors would be. I have a question, Kathleen. What do
Sure.
you find as far as if you want to reinforce a child, and a younger child, let's say 6 to 10 years old, um, if they do what's good, what kind of reinforcements do you use? I know a lot of people don't like using food because of those other, the psychology and dependence you can have
Mhm.
on food, but what kind of positive reinforcements do you use for children?
Uh, my belief around this has really shifted through the course of my career. When I was a younger professional, we used a lot of extrinsic rewards, whether that was, whatever was motivating for the kids, stickers or time on the iPad or um, food. It was, you do this and you either get that directly or you get 5 stars and you get that tangible reward. And what I've learned from doing CERTS training, social communication, emotional regulation, and transactional supports, which is a framework for supporting individuals with autism across the lifespan, is that our job is really to make our kids fall in love with people. So I try to make it as much as possible about building relationships. So if the reward is, you do your reading and then we get to play a fun game together, or we get to do something together where there's some kind of behavioral output from the adult that is motivating to that child. So whether that's hugs or tickles or high fives or just spending quality time together, but trying to make more of that motivation being that internal gratification for engaging in the task and interacting with others rather than um, giving them a sticker per se.
Yeah, I could see that. Just spending more time with mom, dad, with sibling, whatever's doing something. That's a really good reward, and it's a double motivation. It gets
Mhm.
to, it's another behavior we want to improve.
Yeah, Emily Rubin, who's one of the main presenters behind CERT, says our job is to make our kids fall in love with people. It's so often when we think about the autistic brain, we think about that attachment to objects. And what our job really is to do is to create um, that oxytocin cocktail. Oxytocin is the hormone that's released in the brain when we connect with other people. So making kids fall in love with people is our job.
So if we're on these positive type of things, what kind of activities what kind of activities would you give to parents at different age groups? Like, let's say the younger children, the 3 to 6 year olds that could do that, and maybe then the 7 to 12 year olds, and then the teens. Just give us some samples of those type of activities.
Yeah, and I would say it's not so much dependent on age as to what the child is interested in. So, for some of our kids, getting on a swing and being pushed on the swing is hugely motivating. For others, it's bubbles. There might be a YouTube video that is of particular interest that we can watch together and we can socially comment on what we're seeing and how that makes us feel.
Right.
It's really going to depend on the child or the adult what their interests are and meeting them where they're at. I know there's a lot of push from educators to make sure that our rewards are age appropriate, but if the child for instance is interested in Big Bird rather than a TikTok movie, why would I try to reward, for lack of a better word, with a TikTok when that Sesame Street video is what's going to encourage them and get them engaged in that process.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I think, Emily, we've been talking this whole time about following the lead of the child, going where they are.
Absolutely.
So I like,
It's a
yeah, I really,
respect thing too.
yeah. All right. Do we have any other questions from? I know we have quite a few participants here listening in, and just to see if we have questions. If you came to the behaviors webinar, I You probably have a behavior or two that you have questions about, and maybe we answered all the questions, but would love to answer that you have. Don't be shy.
I guess another strategy to think about would be contacting your child's special ed case manager, who, or if you're in an adult setting, the individual who supports them in their daytime activities, and finding out some of those things that might be rewards at school or rewards in their employment situation, and try to work those in at home as much as possible. Sometimes I know, as parents, we know our children well, but there's always that surprise. I can't tell you how many times parents said, really, he wouldn't do that for me. And then when they try it at home, it becomes something that's motivating at home too. So if you're getting kind of stuck in a rut, your child's teacher or OT or speech path might have some other ideas of things that are motivating that, now that they've been out of school for 5-6 weeks, might be motivating at home as well.
Yeah, and once we're past the COVID sheltering in place type of situations, I would encourage people also to try to double up. Where, let's say, if we're working on with a young child, animal sounds or naming animals, and they do something good, you could bring them to a petting zoo, where not only is that going to be fun for them, but you can work on the exact skills you're teaching them. You can name the animals, you can make the sounds of the animals. I've said this before, but we used to take our son to big general stores like a Walmart or a Target, where we'd find all the things we were teaching, and it would be like a scavenger hunt to find all the words. So if spending time with you and you can make it playful, and you can kill two birds with one stone and make the reward for being good another teaching moment, that the efficiency is always good. All right, well, it looks like we have no other questions here. So Emily, do you have anything to add or to just end it for us?
No, I just want to thank Kate for her presentation. It was really great. And thanks everybody for attending. Please, know that we're here for you, even though we're not here in person. That's all I have. Brian, do you have anything?
Yeah, I just want everybody to know that on Thursday, we will have another webinar, Teens for Teens, and it's helping our teens with self-awareness by Gina Pope. She's a master teacher, former special ed teacher. She's on our staff at Gemini. And that will be at 8 o'clock on Thursday. And I think the Autism Society has posted that Zoom meeting. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming out this evening. And thank you so much, Kate, for the presentation. It was great. I learned a bit. I always do on all of these.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, and good night.
Good night, everybody.